Hey, welcome back to Let's Talk About Fatherlessness. My name is Sean Teis. I'm excited to have my guest today, Gary Freeman. It's great to have you with us today, man.
Good to be here, brother. Thank you, man.
Gary, you have a ministry called Major League Dad, where you help dads out and help them be better dads. And so I'm excited to explore that. Will you just take a few minutes, tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, man. So grew up in Chesapeake, Virginia, but then ended up moving to the North Carolina, Greenville first, because was able to play football, get a degree from East Carolina University. So ended up in Raleigh, North Carolina. Senior year is actually when I met my wife, which is really cool. So we've been married for 16 years, and we have two beautiful daughters, 13 and 7. Yeah, man. So that's kind of a real brief synopsis, but kind of been through a lot that I think we can kind of chop up, hopefully, in terms of even how God has gotten me to the point of even trying to lead Major League Dad and to serve in a way that hopefully glorifies Him. So yeah, man.
That's great. Yeah, we now you and I met at I met at an event called the Fatherhood Commission Leaders Summit, right? And
Yes,
we've
sir.
gotten to
Yep.
know each other just a little bit. We had a call, and I really appreciated what you do. Now you also have some experience with CareNet too. Will you tell us a little bit about that? Your background with there?
Yeah, so I worked in, I guess you could say, like in the pro-life world for, man, probably about 10 to 12 years. So started working at a local pregnancy center here in Raleigh, North Carolina, and then that kind of moved into a situation where I started training other pregnancy centers on serving fathers, which I always felt like is like the missing piece of the whole conversation. And abortion conversation is what I mean by that. So yeah, man. So actually, it was really funny because I was at a conference, and the um, president of CareNet, Ronald Warren, he was actually there. We were both speaking, so it was really cool because he went first, and I was like, man, I don't want to come behind Ronald, man. This dude is crazy. He's amazing, man. So he actually ended up staying, and he listened, and then afterwards he came up to me after the session. I was like, hey, man, if I ever kind of get some things going with fatherhood, would you be interested from the standpoint of CareNet being like a national organization that covers, man, like 1,200 or so pregnancy centers. So yeah, that happened, and then maybe a year and a half later, ended up kind of pioneering, I guess you could say, that position, and being the fatherhood and family program manager for the pregnancy center under CareNet. So kind of been using that to kind of springboard into what I've been doing with Major League Dad, and trying to be a little bit in terms of the proactive side of things, and trying to build. Well, our tagline is promote, celebrate, and build phenomenal fathers. So that's kind of where that came from in terms of how I was meeting with guys who we consider abortion minded, and how they actually go about being the influence that they need to be um, in a great way to her, right? So yeah, so that's kind of where a lot of that came into, going from looking at a guy eye to eye in the coaching room, and he's pretty much scared to death, but what that means in terms of the societal narrative, in terms of what a lot of guys get in those situations, and just really just seeing that a guy being scared or just being, underemployed or lack thereof in whatever kind of case, and kind of walking through them with that, and then educating them on what's exactly what she's about to decide, and helping him to be able to communicate with her. So yeah, doing that face to face, to then kind of going through the, I guess you could say, like, teach the teacher mode in terms of what I was doing with Karen, kind of helping pregnancy centers be able to build programs and be able to do that where they were all over the country. So it was fun. So definitely enjoyed that time. Like I said, it kind of springboarded into what I'm doing now with Major League Dad.
Now, what year was that you started doing that?
With Major League Dad or Karen?
With CareNet.
That was 2000, around 2017, 2018.
Okay,
And
so you
then
did
I
that with
served.
them.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
CareNet. And now, for those of you listening, CareNet, and you mentioned it, Gary. It's a organization that helps pregnancy centers. They resource them and help them as they do their mission of helping people choose life. And
Mhm.
it's such a great organization. And I love what you did there because um, such a needed part of it is helping the men that are
Mm-hmm.
choosing life, helping the dads to mentor them and teach them. So I think it's so cool that you spearheaded that. And that, Karen, that's great. We've exhibited at the CareNet National Conference. We even the men's conference they had in Texas. We were there for
Yeah,
that, just trying to help with the fatherless issue. So I mean, I really appreciate that. So then this springboarded into Major League Dad, which is awesome. Now,
mm-hmm.
you said you were speaking at a conference before that when you met the president of CareNet. How did that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, were you doing father ministry before CareNet then too, or were you just speaking on something else or
Yeah, so yeah, that's what I just mentioned. In terms, I was working at a local center. So I was
local
working at a
center?
local
Okay,
pregnancy
yes,
center. Yeah.
okay,
So that was
that's
around
great.
2013, 14 up until that time, which that specific conference I was speaking at with Rollin was around 2016. So
Yeah,
for about 3 or 4 years, I was at that local pregnancy center. Yeah, doing that work.
that's so awesome, man. And so you've been doing this for over a decade now, and the experience you have helping
Mm-hmm.
these dads out, because a lot of times people think, well, what the dad's he doesn't care, he doesn't want to be involved, and so you're just like, hey, I'm going to help teach
Mm-hmm.
these dads and be involved in their life, and really probably a lot of them help break the cycle, because they grew up fatherless or they didn't have a good
Yeah.
home or they didn't have a good relationship with their dad, and so tell us more about Major League Dad now. You're involved in this thing.
Yeah.
This is your gig, and I see it from a distance, and I'm excited about what you're doing. I know you guys just had like an Easter egg hunt event to help dads and their kids have Easter egg
Yeah.
hunts. So tell us
Mm-hmm.
what is Major League Dad for those listening that never heard of it before. What is it, and what do you guys do throughout
Mm-hmm.
the year?
Yeah, so Major League Dad is a specific nonprofit with 501c3, and that's on purpose in terms of the communities and areas that we specifically serve. So we're based in low socioeconomic areas purposely, because I think a lot of times, even from a perspective of crisis pregnancies and things of that nature, they're usually coming from low socioeconomic areas. And I think that's a big deal to kind of break down really quickly in terms of the difference between low income and low socioeconomic. Low income being basically what it sounds like, just income is low, but low socioeconomic is more of access. So what you maybe don't have access to when it comes to different types of services or things that could be for a family, and specifically what we do is for a father. So in the area that we live in, a lot of dads, they either make too much money to qualify for any type of assistance and things of that nature, but it's not enough to be able to keep up within, especially if they're a single father, keeping up with, caring for themselves, caring for their children or families in general. So we try to step into that gap.
Mm.
And kind of just serve in areas of, we have like a three-pronged approach where we serve in the matter of programming. So working with different like Department of Social Services here, which is called Wake County. Then there's another county near us called Johnston County. So doing classes, early fatherhood stuff, but really build a relationship. That's pretty much the aim of what we're trying to do to help serve these guys. And then from there, doing programming, we do events like you mentioned, we did the Major League Dad Easter egg hunt. That was our third one that we've done. That's really for a chance for a lot of the guys that I get to work with to be able to bring their families to one kind of central location and build community there. Like, because a lot of guys think, if I work with a one-on-one, if I do group, it can still feel isolating. But to know that you have community and that you have guys that are actually, trying to get through this fatherhood thing together, and we can do it, and break the huddle, for lack of a weird football term, but be able to go out and just kind of play the game, but know you got guys that are with you, right? And then thirdly, we do living expense help. So, like I mentioned before, how it can just be kind of tough. So when they're going through programming, whether it's 4 week, 6 week, 8 week, a year, whatever the case may be, as long as they're consistent, so it helps with accountability as well. We usually help with like rental assistance, utility payments, like water bills, stuff like that, and we can connect them to different or other organizations as well for like if they have newborns, like diapers and wipes, stuff like that. But it really that creates they have to be consistent in attending the sessions and stuff like that. So it creates accountability in a sense, especially if they're like really young dad. So that's kind of the three areas that we focus on. And I'm actually starting to build out in terms of what it looks like in serving specifically fathers in low socioeconomic areas. And what churches, because my main goal is to eventually get the gospel um, out to these guys and then get them linked into a local church. So
That's great.
really getting, yeah, so really kind of building that bridge as well, man, so that guys at local churches can wrap their arms around guys as well, that we're already kind of dealing with and have a relationship with, and it's an easy pass off. That makes sense. So yeah, man. So that's kind of the crux of what we try to do. And there's a lot of nuances in there that I still kind of do in terms of personal, just crisis pregnancy work, speaking to fatherlessness, speaking to the fatherlessness within having a father, and that's kind of something I experienced. So I think that's something that is really key in terms of what Major League Dad does overall. So sounds like a lot, but it's something that I feel like is super rewarding, and I'm just grateful to be able to do it. So yeah.
Well, even on your website, you have a picture, and then you can see the power that you're speaking to a bunch of men and their kids. And what you're doing is invaluable because
Mm.
we need men to step up and be dads. And um, just the things you're providing, the training, the helping them with some cost of
Mm.
living, the events you're providing for their kids. And I mean, what you're doing is great. And I'm sure, and I know in ministry, I'm full-time ministry too. In ministry, there's so many other things that we don't even
Mm.
mention that we're involved in, where we have people bringing people to us to minister to, and you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
and there's all the
Yeah.
things that are
Definitely.
involved in that. So I think what you're doing is such a great ministry. It's such a great need. And I love the name
Mm.
Major League Dad. I think that's such a cool name. Um, it is because
Yeah, it's my
you know,
baseball affinity, man.
yeah, well, it relates to men, and that
Yeah.
to
Mm.
Major League Dad's such a cool name, and it inspires men like, hey, I want to be a Major League Dad. I want to be involved, and
Yeah.
so that's great. So, what are some of the obstacles you guys have with dads? I
Mm.
mean, a lot of the dads,
Yeah.
the ones you work with, do they really want to be involved, or do you have to try to challenge them to be, or is it more the ones that come to you? They're the
Yeah.
ones that really want to get involved. What are the ones you're dealing with?
Yeah.
What kind of dads are you working with?
Yeah, man. So I would say it's more, if I could kind of put it in a percentage, more 70-30 in terms of guys who it's just they either it's a generational thing, is what I like to call it, in terms of they just didn't have the example and their example didn't have an example. So now they're just like the third generation of not having a real example. So I'm always big on I don't know if is I think, well, let me back up. I think I hear it a lot in terms of, having a father step up, but I feel like a lot of times we just need somebody to step in so that they can learn and get the tools to be able to step up. So I think that's where a big part of it comes in terms of that's where a lot of guys I see. So that takes a lot of patience, um, and just humility on my part, I think. And I hate to say it that way, but because there's times where they're gonna, not be consistent, not be accountable, but you're trying to build new habits. So that's the bigger percentage of kind of who we serve. And then there's, like you said, there's times where I could, man, I don't have one on now, but I usually wear my Major League Dad kind of like shirts and stuff, and I'll be in a supermarket or something, and I've ran into somebody that was like, "Hey, I love that shirt or whatever," and I'm like, "Cool," and I start explaining it to him, and then next thing you know, this literally just happened like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and a grandmother was like, "Hey, my son, he just got out of prison, but he has 2 kids, and he's trying to figure it out, and he really needs to talk to somebody." And then I was like, "Okay, well, cool." So gave her my information, and then connect with him, and then start by doing the kind of intro, take them out to coffee, take them out lunch, stuff like that, and that kind of builds relationships as well. So you have that kind of organic, just prayer of God help me be who ever I can be to somebody else, and then boom, that happens in an Aldi grocery store. So it's kind of like I think that's the both ways of kind of how things have gotten done, and then kind of the guys that I see, which I say that biggest majority, especially being like specific in low socioeconomic areas, is going to be guys that have generationally never really had an example. So just being patient and being able to like sit with them, do what needs to be done. Sometimes it takes, you know, the hit and miss on purpose for them to learn the lesson, but being there, right? Like being present, being able to walk with them. And then eventually for me, just because I have, just pastoral background, my thing is, really wanting to um, them to see Jesus through this work of patience and walking with them. But hey, here's the answer for your life and being the gospel message. So it's kind of like knowing that um, it kind of makes it where I have this like weird theology about it, where it's like microwave versus crock pot. And it's like, we kind of want to microwave, hit the 1 minute, and just go, not even type in 100 anymore. Just hit express one and it just goes, right? That's kind of how we want things.
Yep.
But I feel like, a lot of things that comes into working with guys, working with fathers who never had really anybody step in, but now the expectation is for them to step up. We have to have a crock pot mentality. Like we throw all the ingredients in, the potatoes, carrots, now the pot roast and all that, and you just kind of set it on the simmer and just let it go. And you know that the result, hours later will be good and tasty over, rice or mashed potatoes. But at the same time, that's kind of how I view working with guys that we mainly work with. It's just kind of having the crock pot mentality. You got to keep throwing all the ingredients and just let it simmer, check on it, let it simmer, stir it around. And then eventually, man, we pray that they become phenomenal fathers. So that's the aim that we kind of look at in the guys we work with. And that's kind of what we get. Yeah.
And for the long term,
Yeah,
that's so
man.
great. And
Yes,
you're reaching
sir.
these guys right where they're at, and it's such a great need. Now you're just in what area are you in then again? You're in North Carolina. You
Yes,
cover like
sir.
a counties area, like a bunch of counties or one county
Yeah,
or what?
yeah. So I'm in the Raleigh, North Carolina area. So I'm right near just I don't know for my March Madness folks. So I'm right in the middle of, you got NC State, Carolina, Duke. I went to East Carolina, which is almost like the stepchild of all the big three, kind of. But that's how we kind of I hate to use
Yeah,
that, but sorry, it is what it is. That's kind of how
yeah,
we treat. But you have all that, like I'm within 20 minutes to 45 minutes of everything. So we serve all of those
that's great.
different like areas, and it's called the Triangle. So
Mhm.
just serving all those different areas. But there's an area in Raleigh, Southeast Raleigh, which is predominantly African American, Hispanic, and that's where we actually we were praying about this. My wife and I, we actually moved to this area specifically, coming back
Wow,
from when I was working with Canada and stuff, so up in Virginia, but moving back to North Carolina, um, and specifically moving this area because of just who's here and kind of having like a home base, I guess you could say. And they're working out of the home base in different areas. So that's kind of what we've been doing.
a lot of opportunity there. I'm sure. I've spoken in
Oh yeah.
a couple of churches around there. I think it was Wilson, North Carolina, Apex, North
Okay.
Carolina.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so,
man.
yeah, I know the area a little bit, not a ton, but there's a lot of opportunities for ministry. So you're doing great work there. Now let's go
Mhm.
back to Gary's childhood. Okay, we talked about this a
Yeah.
little bit before we jumped on and recorded, but let's talk about why you're passionate about this. Obviously you're a dad, but you're passionate about this also for other reasons. We share why.
Yeah. Yeah. Most definitely. So growing up, I'm a PK. So my dad was a pastor in the AME denomination for man, probably close to 40 years. But one of the things that was that's important about that is me and my father, we had a horrible relationship. So my 18 years of living in that home was like I saw all the things you probably shouldn't see when it
Mm,
comes to ministry and moral, everything that's not right. Um, and it was really tough because by the time I got to college, I felt like I had worked hard to gain this full football scholarship. I didn't need God. I didn't need his church. I didn't need nothing because the example that I had, there were days where I just wish he wasn't even there because of the way he treated myself and my mom. And it was crazy, man. So I vividly remember, and I kind of use this as kind of context. When I was around 10 years old, my dad came in my room one night and just, sat down in a chair and I was sitting on my bed and he was like, you're a mistake, right?
mm,
And just said it. And I was like, whoa, like I'm a 10-year-old kid. Like, I don't know what's going on. And I was messing up your pastoral plans and churches you were trying to have and do.
no.
So I think stuff that was kind of the stuff that was going on. So that's what I mean, where a lot of the wounds that were kind of created from that, I didn't honestly start seeing until I got married. And then I thank God for my wife, who's she was in the faith before me. So I thank God that when I came to faith, we started dating then, and I had someone who was strong in who she was and a disciple of Jesus herself. So we kind of struggled our first like 3 years because I was just seeing wounds be reopened that never
Yeah.
really were closed, to be honest. So yeah, the beautiful part about this though is the last 2 years, my dad he passed away about 7 years ago. So, but the last 2 years of his life, we were able to basically reconcile. So that
Mhm.
was something that
That's
was like
good.
super beautiful. I'm super grateful to God for that because I was able to, my mom passed before him. So he moved back to where he was from, which is Kinston, North Carolina. And I remember driving down and just having a conversation with him in his apartment. And I remember going into that thinking, I wanted to get the answers that I needed, um, or actually the answers that I wanted. But I left with the answers that I need. And that was to see that generationally he had hope, right? So it was like, man, this is crazy. So that kind of, I think, sparks in terms of even what I see with like Major League Dad. I feel like a lot of what God graced me to go through and to still be on the other side of it and to now love Jesus and to love his word and to love his church and to even be in that position, I feel like is God's grace. So I look at it as, working with fathers, man, you never know a story until you hear it. And you really can't fully understand because you didn't live it. But taking the time to listen, I think is really huge for a lot of the fathers that I work with because it takes time for the actual story to get out. It's kind of one of those things where a lot of the guys, when I first meet with them, I'll be like, hey man, so how you doing? And then I go through about four how you doings, right? Before you actually get down to how they're actually doing. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's a part of, building the story. And that was for me. So ended up going through, therapy and all kinds of stuff, marriage therapy with my wife and a great Christian counselor who really like kind of didn't hold back on it. And that's what I needed. So I was grateful for that, but it was over, years of just kind of grinding and making sure that, for one, how's my relationship with the Lord? What I like to call mirror ministry. Like, how was that guy in the mirror doing and following Jesus? And then out of that overflow, how am I loving my wife well, loving my girls well? And then how am I loving those who I serve through Major League Dad well, or through the local church well, stuff like that. So that's kind of the that's kind of like the aim of where I feel like, man, I'm super grateful that the Lord graced me through living. But like I say those 18 years in the home and kind of seeing what I did see, but at the same time being on the other side and being able to love the Lord even more because His grace was sufficient then and sufficient now. So I think that's something where my own childhood, my own story, is something that I lean into when I'm dealing with guys who are coming from situations that are unbearable or there could be generational hurt of over and over and over again of fatherlessness. But then there's also the percentage that have a father, but the father could be in some type of situation himself, still being in the home, and that's kind of the category that I consider myself. So
Hmm.
I think through that plus fatherlessness, we got a lot of work to do to kind of like step
Yeah.
into stories and be able to share the story through love, through um, physically being there. I kind of look at John 4, like actually offering or, having water that's there physically, but actually, introducing them to, the spiritual water that they need for their eternity. So, my own life, I just thank God so much for just gracing me, through that time and especially being able to reconcile with my father. That was huge. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel like God has allowed my story to kind of be grafted into his story, the main story, and then using that to work with the guys that we need to work with.
And it's amazing how you came from that point of, your dad didn't care about you and didn't want you, and then you were able to have that
Mm-hmm.
reconciliation. But even the fact that you were able to come to faith in Christ, and then you were able to turn your life around, because so many times people, they just get so bitter and they don't
Yeah,
even want
man.
anything to do with God because of the way their dad was. And I
Right.
honestly, I think a lot of times it's sometimes harder for people that had a dad in their house that rejected them than for us to have a dad that maybe is rejected us
Yeah.
and lives like my dad lived across the country, and
Mm,
he
yeah.
rejected me, but I forgot he even existed. But with that, you probably
Mm,
had like a daily reminder of that. Was it right? Is that, I mean, is that what it
yeah.
was like
Yeah,
for you?
man. Man, you hit the nail on the head. I think that's things that, to be honest, that was guys in my community who similar to your, what you're just saying, like their dad wasn't even in, the same state or across the country, and I knew that, and I used
Yeah.
to be jealous almost because
Uh-huh.
it's like, man, you don't even got to worry about them. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
But I used to try to find ways to not go home so I didn't
Yeah.
have to deal with them. You know what I'm saying? So I think there's a dynamic there that kind of always, begs the question of, how do we step in?
Yeah.
Because both situations can be, dire in terms of the need of an example. But how we do that, how we step in, the patience of stepping in, just because the holds are different, but in essence, they're the same because there's still an absence of love. So it's kind of like, man, bro, it's so like alarming to me because there's that kind of widens the base of fatherlessness in a sense to me because like I said, like I would personally probably be envious of growing up. I would be envious of a situation like yours, which is wild
Mhm.
to think,
Yeah.
but
Wow.
that's you know what I'm saying? But that's the case, man. So yeah, man, yeah, that's why I say we got to step in.
And was it harder
You know?
with people thought because your dad was a pastor, so people thought you had like this good home life?
Yeah.
That was
Oh
probably really
man, that was the
challenging.
hardest part. Yeah, because
Yeah.
every church, and he was actually, which is crazy, he was a great preacher.
Wow.
So he was a great orator, communicator. And I grew up, predominantly black church. So, the hooping and hollering and, you shouting for 45 minutes on it. I lived it, right? So I think, but he was able to, like, as they would say, set people hair on fire, but then, come home and sit down and have a conversation like I explained with me and then, proceed to cuss me and my mom out. So it was wild, man. It was like, it was the wildest, like, kind of hypocritical situation, but I had to go out and put a smile on every day because,
Yeah.
oh, I know, living with Pastor Freeman is amazing. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, okay, if you only knew. But that's fuel for even my own home. You know what I'm saying? Like how my
Yeah.
wife and how my kids, if I go out and I'm preaching and I'm leading and I'm doing all these things, it's kind of like, do they really believe it? So that's kind of like something that I didn't even notice that I wasn't doing that I needed to be
Mhm.
doing, and really just following in that example, which kind of goes to what I was saying, man, I wish I'd never had the example because it created so many different wounds and deep things that had to still be, like broken up and dug out of me kind of feel. So, yeah, man, it's just a weird dynamic.
And that's a challenge to dads or even pastors that are listening to this right now. Challenge for all of us as men, to making sure that
Mm-hmm.
we're serving our family first, our wives and
Yeah.
our kids, and that's it's not easy. And I honestly believe the devil wants
Mm-hmm.
to he wants to destroy our families, he wants to destroy our marriages, and making sure that our first ministry is our spouse and our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And Gary, you're hitting it because we can go out and minister all day to
Mm-hmm.
all these people that, and honestly, I mean, when we're forsaking our family, those people don't matter. I mean, I know it sounds bad whenever
Mm-hmm.
you're in
Yeah,
ministry,
I guess.
but your family matters first. And so I love this. I love this raw interview with you talking about this topic because I believe there's so
Mm-hmm.
many pastors and ministry leaders that just need to be reminded. And we all do. I mean, honestly, we all need a reality
Yeah,
check.
man.
I mean, weekly, daily sometimes, making sure, am I being
Yeah,
the dad I'm supposed to be to these kids? And they're seeing me ministering to other people. Am I making sure I'm ministering to them first? And so that's definitely
yeah.
a challenge, and it's something we all have to check on. And I appreciate you bringing that to light. And now we just give us
Mm-hmm. Praise
some
God, man.
ideas, some practical tips, things that you do with dads. Like, what are some ways that you disciple them?
Yeah.
Some things you teach them, biblical principles. I mean, you've touched on some of them. What are some ways you guys do that?
Yeah, man. So I usually, depending on the setting that I'm in, like if it's a setting that allows me to be biblical, to be honest, I'll make sure to use, like the sons of Zebedee is a big model that I use in terms of how the mother took James and got, and tried to, usurp authority or like dealings of that nature, or just taking the, Adam and Eve, um, taking the story of Genesis and being able to be like, hey, the Bible tells us that he was there. So what does that mean to you in terms of not the, to go all seminary, but not the eisegete, but it's kind of like this, I try to use those to try to relate to where they are. And I really want to listen to their story first. So let's say I have an hour and a half meeting with them. Usually 45 to 50 minutes of I'm prodding questions to get them to talk to me. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like, I need to hear your story. I need to hear it. And while they're talking, usually I'm just playing like, okay, Lord, how do we respond? And I have these set stories maybe to use, but at the same time, just relying on the Holy Spirit to be like, okay, how to do that? And using those as almost like sneaky discipleship, where it's kind of like working in where they can trust me to listen to them. But at the same time, they can trust that I'm going to give them what I feel like is the Lord's truth, not my truth, not any other truth except for that. And then we both can move together because I can talk from a transparency standpoint of my own shortcomings and falling and sin and all that kind of stuff. So that's usually one model or one way that I try to kind of even take just a simple conversation, like if that's at Starbucks or, for lunch somewhere or something like that, but really asking prodding questions of like, what's your story? And listening within what they're saying for the next question, or the next thought, and just asking and just keep asking, keep pushing, keep poking the bear, in a sense, and like really trying to get them to open up because maybe they've never done that before about their story, or if they have they some other experience? If they have they gotten really good at lying? Honestly, like kind of putting a false narrative or twist to their story, and really just kind of dissecting that, and then however long that takes before really trying to move into, well, okay, well, how do we create new habit? Here's something that I'm dealing with. Here's maybe a biblical principle we can both lean into, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, or something like that, right? So that's one way when I would say if I have like biblical leeway to kind of practically walk with a guy, especially if I don't know him and build a relationship, or even if I do know him, that he can trust me, right? But then if I'm dealing with like sessions and groups, maybe that I'm doing with like Department of Social Services, through the county or through one city or something like that, I partner with National Fatherhood Initiative. That's out of Maryland. And I use a lot of their stuff, to be honest. So like the Father in the 15 curriculum they have, I use that. The key behaviors workshop curriculum. And if it's like specific stuff on, sometimes Department of Social Services want to like teach a specific baby type of class. Do the 24/7 dad, AM, PM, those kind of curriculums. Through National Father Initiative, to me, those are always doorways to building relationships. So
Yeah.
I usually so that's a way to try to find out if that's going on where you live. I think is kind of key because um one of the things is that if that's not offered, man, how can you maybe God put something in you to be the one to offer it, right? So I think that's kind of where I kind of came at it from. So if you have the time and the space to be able to think through it that way, maybe God can lead in you stepping in that way. So that's kind of another kind of way of just trying to figure out how do you just get active? What's a practical way to just kind of go out, like contact the local county and just kind of see what they have for father. And then from there, man, can I get attached in any kind of way, or is there something I can add to it, or anything of that nature? Um, but I think in both of those scenarios, if you are a father, I think working out of um, what do I practically do with my kids is going to be the key to any one of those other things working.
Mm.
So, especially as a Christian father, like man, like my oldest daughter, she's like my little theologian. She loves to read. She's always asking me questions that I have to say, let me get back to you on that. But it's kind of like that's what creates, I think, and prompt, a lot of when I do go out and I'm saying to my family I'm going out, she believes it because we're doing it. We're walking through scripture, or we're walking through some type of topic that she hears in school. And she's like, what does this mean? And we just kind of talk about it. And then we relate it to, well, what does the scripture say?
Mm.
Or being able to just kind of deal with the space they're dealing in But that actually gives me the strength to go out and now practically do that with other men, or
That's
to do
great.
that in like different scenarios within the city, stuff like that. So that's kind of my aim. Yeah.
That's great, man. I love what you do. We have less than a minute left, but just tell us where to
Oh,
find
man, yeah,
your
yeah.
organization and how they can find you.
Yeah, so the easiest way I would say is go to majorleaguedad.org. So Major League Dad is all one big word. Majorleaguedad.org. You can just shoot me an email through there, and I can get back to you at that point. Or we have a Major League Dad page on Instagram, which is major_league_dad. And then I kind of do videos and stuff like that on that for that purpose. But the easiest way is through majorleaguedad.org. You shoot an email, and then let's connect.
Gary, thanks so much for being on with us today. We really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for checking out this episode of Let's Talk About Fatherlessness. We want to now challenge you to take the next step by either starting a single mom community group in your church or with your ministry, or by joining our network of God is My Dad churches and ministries. Isn't it a great experience to be able to start a single mom community group?
Yeah, and it's just, if you talk to single moms, a lot of times what they'll tell you is the one thing they're lacking is that community, just a group that they can go in and they know there's no judgment. You know, everyone may not have the same situation. Everyone doesn't know what they're going through, but they can go in and they know there's no judgment. And it takes that kind of that restriction and that wall down for them so that they can share and then that they can grow in Christ.
And our single mom community groups are a wonderful ministry. And if your church can start one, we'd love to have you. We can help you get set up. We have the curriculum and all the resources you need. If you can't start one, we'd love to have you start by joining our network of churches and ministries, our God is My Dad network of churches and ministries, where you can get your church or your ministry on our map, and people can find you and find your ministry in your church so that they can get plugged into your church or ministry locally. So check that out. You can find all these resources at lifefactors.org. We have books, we have all kinds of content on there at lifefactors.org. Check it out today.